This one's fucked up. Wherever you are in this hemisphere, you are on native land. Never forget that before the Spanish arrived in California, for thousands of years, from sea to shining sea, this was native country. With more than 300,000 natives living here, representing over 100 tribes, each with its own individual traditions, most of those cultures completely lost by the arrival of settlers. Write that down. Burn it in your brain. Never forget that the Russians, European American colonists, and Spanish missionaries' arrival on the Pacific coastline forever changed the native people's way of life. The first known interaction with the natives in California was in the Monterey area in 1602, when a Spanish expedition was searching for a safe harbor for their ships. Well over 100 years passed, with little attention paid to Alta California. Then an expedition of Spanish missionaries arrived in the Monterey area in 1769, and Spain began colonizing, erasing the identities of the California indigenous people who entered the mission and in exchange were given a wool shirt with long sleeves and a wool blanket. The women were also given a wool petticoat, and the men even received a breechclout to cover their groin area. They were then forcibly baptized into the Catholic faith and thrown into labor camps that were filthy and disease-ridden. The San Rafael Mission was established where later the first provisional governor of California and his band of Spanish soldiers led expeditions, removing Pomo people from their lands, bringing them to the new mission. 5 years down the road, California became part of the Mexican Republic, and the Mexican government gave out large tracts of Pomo land to its settlers. And the foreigners and white colonists brought deadly diseases and epidemics. In one instance, a Russian ship brought a case of smallpox. The indigenous people did not have immunity to such diseases. The tribe's population heavily decreased, and the bones of thousands were left unburied, bleaching the hills of Sonoma and Napa counties. As all this happened, the domestic stock animals brought by the foreigners consumed all of the native foods and damaged the gathering areas while they grazed, foods the locals depended on for survival. Stream channels were disturbed and often rerouted, land was blasted away, and huge amounts of soil entered the streams and rivers, destroying the habitat of the fish and other aquatic species that once were food for the indigenous people. 10 years later, there was a massive malaria outbreak, and the following year the missions were authorized by the Crown to convert the natives within a 10-year period. They had until 1844. They were then to surrender the control over the mission's livestock, fields, orchards, and buildings, but the Padres never achieved their goal, and the lands and wealth were then stolen from the natives. The California mission system was not the romanticized fantasy that we were fed in the 4th grade. Debunked. Unpack that. Accept it. The history of genocide casts a shadow over California. It hovers over the land of the endless summer, over Disneyland, over the surfers, the beach boys, the palm trees, the Hollywood sign. And yet there is also a story of California Indian resistance and survival that is miraculous. This is said by my hero, Benjamin Madley. He is an associate professor of history at UCLA and has been on a more than decade-long odyssey to document and reveal the existence of a government-sponsored genocide. Queens of the Mines features the authentic stories of gold rush women who blossomed from the camouflaged, twisted roots of California. This is the final chapter of Season 1, Part 1 of 3. Today, we will meet the Queen of Preservation, Nika. I am Andrea Anderson. This is a true story from America's largest migration, the Gold Rush. And this is Queens of the Mines. The preceding program features stories that contain adult content, including violence, which may be disturbing to some listeners or secondhand listeners. So, discretion is advised. The final chapter, The Queen of Preservation, Part 1. The wilderness holds an abundance of power. Power that is manifested in the rocks, the springs, the animals, and the trees. A power that is sought after by some and other times found when stumbled upon. The indigenous people of the Americas are familiar with this power. Still, when foreigners came to this land, most did not refer to the natural beauty it held, but the wealth it retained. An Eastern Pomo woman is pondering over petroglyphs on the face of boulders near her village of Danoa in Clear Lake, California, where her family had lived for thousands of years. The petroglyphs were at the entrance of a natural tunnel in a collection of boulders known as the Baby Rocks. She had fasted for 4 days now, and came alone to move through the rocks in an altered state of consciousness. The Baby Rocks held the spirits of the future children to be born to the parents who followed the Pomo ritual. These rocks held a power affecting fertility, and the carved petroglyphs allowed her entrance, where she negotiated with Mother Earth. 9 months later, Nika was born in the village of Danoa, under the sod roof of her family's dome-shaped home made of tulle and earth-covered wooden poles. It was 1849. Nika sat with her mother, watching her make a basket with great care, weaving in the dowel, or spirit door. This spirit door would allow good spirits to come and circulate inside of the basket, while the good or bad spirits were released. The base of the basket was completely covered in vivid red feathers of the woodpecker. The surface so smooth, it resembled the breast of the bird itself. Her mother had a sacred gift in making the baskets that the family used for cooking, storing food, religious ceremonies, and daily life. Her technique was exquisite. Together, Nika and her mother collected basket materials annually: swamp canes, ryegrass, black ash, willow shoots, sedge roots, the bark of redbud, the root of bulrush, and the root of the gray pine. Nika's mother taught the 5-year-old girl everything she knew when it came to drying, cleaning, splitting, soaking, and dyeing the materials. It would be many weeks before the basket was finished. In the coming days, she would be taught to fasten beads to the basket's border, and the pendants of abalone shell that Nika had worked so hard to polish would be attached. In the distance, she could see the fellow children of her tribe arriving home from their gathering expeditions on the outside. The community and culture was the inside of the Pomo home, and the wilderness and the wild areas to which they went for hunting and gathering wild foods was the outside. A dualism, a contrast of community and wilderness, domestic and wild, culture and nature. Surely the children's baskets would be filled with bulbs, roots, clover, pinole seeds, gooseberries, blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, wild greens, gnats, mushrooms, acorns, nuts, caterpillars, grasshoppers, and yerba buena. The men in the tribe were away on a hunt with bows and harpoons in search of deer, elk, antelope, rabbit, sea lions, rats, squirrels, waterfowl, and birds. They would periodically burn the land to remove hiding places for the game, and they would also fish for salmon, carp, blackfish, and collect clams and mussels. Women gave life, and because the giving of life was woman's most important role, she did not participate in the taking of life, which included coming in contact with weapons. Instead, the women worked at home gathering food and materials and preparing the plant-based foods. They would shell acorns, crush and water them till they were easy to work with, and ground the acorns into a paste, making a mush or bread or soup. Pies would be made with the acorn meal and gathered berries and nuts. Nika enjoyed her life on the inside, but Nika was unaware of the struggles on the outside, the struggles of the nearby Pomo tribes, and she was unaware of what this meant for her, her family, her tribe, and her cherished land. Are you enjoying the podcast? Please make sure to rate us and subscribe. If you would like to support the podcast, consider purchasing some of our brand new merchandise. We have hoodies just in time for fall, t-shirts, tank tops, totes, coffee mugs, water bottles, even fanny packs, and it's all now available at queensofthemines.com. This episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Columbia Mercantile 1855. Columbia Mercantile 1855 is creating Eureka moments for every shopper. At first glance, it would appear a living museum until you look closer. In the clever Gold Rush era aesthetic, you will find a treasure trove of gold standard products for your modern life. Now more than ever, locals are discovering the amazing, reimagined, real working Gold Rush era general store. And Teresa, the owner, has not changed or increased prices since the COVID crisis. You know, I swear I don't even think she's taken a day off. To better serve the community, the Mercantile has tripled the amount of food and beverage ordering since shelter-in-place began. Teresa carries a mix of quality international products and local products, perfectly replicating the diverse provisions of the 19th century, when Columbia was California's second largest city after San Francisco. From the mundane paper towels, toilet paper, poison oak soap, to customer requested French and Irish butters, tofu, duck, and don't forget beer and wine. It is super common to hear, "Wow, I didn't expect to find that here in Columbia." You can support local producers while shopping at the Mercantile. Businesses like Diesel Family Ranch, Inner Sanctum Cellars, Indigene, Cover's Apple Ranch, Gold Country Honey Farms, Jamestown Olive Oils, Liz Sandoval of Licha Salsas, and Pamela Anderson of Simply Amazing Kettle Corn. She also has gluten-free, vegan, and dairy-free options, and the store accepts SNAP and EBT. Right now, you can find the amazing artwork by Sarah Ann Graham, inspired by the Queens of the Mines, on display at the Columbia Mercantile 1855. And if you cannot get to the store, you can check her out online at Sarah, with an H, Ann, with an E, graham.com. The Columbia Mercantile 1855 is located at Columbia State Historic Park at 11245 Jackson Street. It's a great place to keep our local economy moving, and at a time like this, it's super important to shop local. And the Columbia Mercantile 1855 is friendly, welcoming, fairly priced, and open daily from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. The Eureka Podcast Network is literally weeks away from launching. You will be able to download a free app and have all of the local network podcasts at your fingertips, including my new shows, Here Lies, an audio tour of historic cemeteries, Rustic Rituals, Affirmations and Meditations for Country Folk, and Queens of the Mind Season 2, and more. Find us on Instagram now to keep up at Eureka Podcasts. Eureka is spelled Y-O-U-R-E-K-A because this network is yours. Okay, back to the story. Andrew Kelsey and Charles Stone, American settlers and rough men, were often in trouble with the authorities and were the first Anglo-American colonists in the Clear Lake region. There were 3 Kelsey brothers, all of whom seem to have joined the Bear Flag Party that hoisted the Bear Flag at Sonoma in 1846. And with Stone, Andrew, and Benjamin Kelsey, and a man named Sherland, they purchased a ranch dubbed Big Valley Ranch, 90 miles north of San Francisco in Clear Lake from Salvador Vallejo in 1847, including 15,000 cattle and 2,500 horses. The Kelseys, Sherland, Stone, and a handful of men that they hired raided the surrounding eastern Pomo and Clear Lake Wapo villages to the west and east of their new ranch. They rounded up several hundred men, women, and children. Everything was taken from them, even their fishing supplies and simple knives. The native men were used as cattle drivers and cowboys and forced into back-breaking labor as they dug wells and built the grand hacienda, outbuildings, and a large barrier in which they would remain inside, along with their wives and children, imprisoned. Behind the high fence, Andrew Kelsey and Charles Stone were brutally mistreating the natives for their own entertainment. For many years, Kelsey and Stone ruled over the eastern Pomo and Clear Lake Wapo people using fear, torture, sadism, and murderous force. The inside was no longer safe. Kelsey and Stone had also taken local Pomo chief Augustine's wife as a sex slave, and the often drunken white men shot at the Wapo and Pomo just for the fun of seeing them jump. Stone and Kelsey constantly ordered Pomo fathers to bring them their daughters, to be sexually used and abused, and the men who resisted were whipped, lashed, hung by their hands or toes. This was a usual punishment, and it occurred at least 2 or 3 times a week. If a worker broke any rule, they would be hung up by his thumbs so that his toes just touched the floor, giving him at least 100 lashes and keeping him there 2 or 3 days, most of the time with nothing to eat. The enslaved Pomo people were forbidden to hunt or fish on any of Kelsey and Stone's land. They were also forbidden to leave Kelsey and Stone's land, and the food supply was meager, and there was no other way to supplement it. 20 elders had died from starvation over winter, and 4 of the native slaves had been killed by severe whipping by the end of 1849. Da Pitao, the wife of Big Jim, a native Pomo slave, was sick and starving. She sent her son to her sister, who was the 18-year-old Pomo man Shook's wife, and now Stone's slave. Shook would later become known as the Pomo chief Augustine. Dapitao told her son, "Tell your aunt that I am starving and sick. Ask for a handful of wheat." He hurried to Stone's house and told his aunt just what his mother had said. His aunt, fearful for her sister's health, gave her nephew 5 cups of wheat that she tied up in an apron. The young man started back to the camp with the precious gift, in a hurry to help his sick mother. Charles Stone spotted the boy running from the house and called him back. He approached the boy and swatted the wheat from his hands, the apron falling to the ground, the icy wind blowing the grains away. The young boy tried to gather the life-saving substance but was captured by Stone and taken to a nearby tree, where he was tied up and given 100 lashes. When Stone had had enough, he shot the young boy, who suffered for 2 whole days before he died, his punishment attempting to feed his starving mother. She was not the only starving person in the village at Stone and Kelsey's encampment. The 2 foremen and the 18 native herdsmen who were chosen and forced to look out for the horses, stock and hogs and cattle were the only slaves being fed. The men would receive about 6 pints of boiled wheat each for a day's work, and they would have to share the wheat back at home. So even these herders were starving. Action had to be taken by the natives, or all would be lost. It was decided that Shuck and Zesis, the head riders of the 18 herdsmen, would be secretly hired to kill a cow and bring it back to the village so the people could eat. The foremen debated the plan all night. Night or day, the order of action, deciding in the end to do the job at night and to take the best lasso horses in the barn. The best lasso horses in the barn, of course, belonged to Stone and Kelsey. Shook promised, "Somebody is going to get killed on this job." Under the moonlight from a cloudy sky, Shuck and Zesis crept to the house to see if Kelsey and Stone had gone to bed. They had. It was drizzling on them as they went to the barn and took their horses and saddles. The plan was to round up the band that was feeding out west. Shuck would make the first lasso, and Zesis would do the foot lassing. Under the stars, Shuck called out, "I see a big one here. Hurry and come on." Shuck saw his chance and threw the rope on a hefty ox. Zesis rushed over. The stampede began. The ox joined in. Shuck's horse was pulled to the wet, slippery ground, and he was knocked off. And the ox and the horse got away. Zesis attempted to get his rope on, but was too far ahead, and eventually he gave up chase. Defeated, they returned Kelsey's horse to the barn and reported the bad news to the men of the tribe who gathered in Zesis' home. They all knew death was in the pot for their foreman, and the men faced another night of debate. It seemed obvious to the head riders that the solution was to kill the white men. No one agreed. A Wapo man offered the suggestion of the tribe giving Stone and Kelsey beads, 40 sticks, the equivalent of 16,000 beads, or $100. And no one agreed. One of the men thought they could tell Stone or Kelsey the horse was stolen, and no one agreed. Another man suggested that the other horse should be turned out and that they tell Stone and Kelsey both horses were stolen. No one agreed. It was not looking good for Shuck and Zesis, and the men decided murder was the only option. A man known as Boosie decided to join the men as daylight was approaching. Before Kelsey and Stone awoke, the boys and girls of the village who worked inside the household as servants worked together in the wee hours to remove every gun, knife, bow and arrow, and anything that could be used as a weapon. Shook's wife poured water onto the two men's gunpowder, rendering it useless. Kelsey and Stone would be helpless in defense. Once that was known, a man known as Kansas agreed to go as well, and Ma Laksa K2 joined the band. Starvation was the main reason the slaves at Big Valley Ranch wanted Stone and Kelsey dead, but hardly the only motive. They set out together early that December morning of 1849 to save their people, to do right and fear no man. Each morning, Charles Stone would start his day all alone, while building a large fire to heat up a pot in order to boil the wheat for the 18 herdsmen and their 2 foremen. This morning, when he showed up carrying a pot full of fire that he had taken from the fireplace, he was shocked to see 5 of the men already waiting for him. "What's the matter, boys?" He was curious. "You came early this morning. Something wrong?" Boosie responded, "Oh, nothing. Me hungry, that's all." Kansas looked confused and said to Shuck, "I thought we came to kill this man. Give me these arrows and bows." He pulled the bow and the arrow from Shuck's hand and raised it, pointing right at Stone. "What are you trying to do?" Stone whispered, as the arrow was cut loose, striking him in the stomach. Stone pulled the arrow out of his torso and attempted to take off running towards the house. The men fought, and Boosie's arm was broken after Stone struck him with the fire pot before he succeeded in getting into his house, locking the door. Kelsey soon arrived, noticing blood on the doorstep of Stone's home. The men jumped out to ambush him and a fight ensued. Kelsey said to the men, "Don't kill me. I'm a good man for you." Kansas replied, "Yes, you are such a good man that you have killed many of us." Kelsey broke free and ran for the creek, but not before he was stabbed in the back twice. As he approached the creek, he was shot in the back with an arrow, and Kelsey managed to pull it out before he dove into the water, staying out of sight until approaching the opposite shore, where, surprise, several native men were waiting for him. Kelsey saw Julu, a man he knew well, and begged him for his life. As he lost blood and became weak, Julu said, "It's too late, Kelsey. If I attempt to save you, I also will be killed. I cannot save you." Julu held Kelsey by the arms and took him to Big Jim, who grabbed his other arm. They led Kelsey to Dapito. "This is the man who killed our son. Take this spear." After the mother stabbed the white man in the heart and finished Kelsey off, his body was left for the coyotes. At the house, Zasus and Kansas were following the drops of blood, chasing a breathless Stone, who had been crawling up the stairs. The blood led them into the door, where Stone's foot revealed his location. Kansas drew his arrow across the bone, and Zasus swung the door open, but Stone did not move. It looked as if he had bled to death, or so they thought. They took his body and threw it out the window, and somehow Stone got back up and ran to the forest, where the wife of Shook found him and used a rock to end his life for good. This woman, taken from her home and forced to be the sex slave to these men, was the final hand in both their fates. The 5 men then reunited at the house and immediately gathered food to bring home to their families. After a much-needed meal, they left for the valleys and upper lake to kill cattle to finally feed the people. There were thousands of horses and cattle, and they would eat well. The men who were able to ride caught a horse, and the women of the tribes went to the house and gathered all the corn and wheat they could pack up. The men who were able to ride caught a horse, and the women of the tribes went to the house and gathered all the corn and wheat they could pack up. The plan was for the women, children, and elders to flee to the hiding places at Scotts Valley and Fishel's Point. Shukenensis patrolled the trail on the west side of the valley. Kansas and Maleketu were chosen to watch the trail that came in from the lower lake, and 2 other men were watching the trail that came from 8 Mile Valley. For 2 weeks, no white person was seen on the trail until 2 white men on horseback were spotted coming over the hill from the lower lake. And even from a far distance, the white men noticed the camp was deserted. Then the man noticed Kansas and Maleketu coming around a small hill to cut them off, and they turned around and left. Another 3 days passed, no white men seen. Some news coming. At the landing, the men learned that the white warriors were coming up the lake in boats to kill all the natives around the lake, and they needed to hide the best place they could. Kelsey's brother Benjamin, full of vengeance, rounded up a posse. A random campaign of violence against all Clear Lake Pomo was waged. 2 men camped at the top of the north peak of Uncle Sam Mountain, watching for danger for 4 days. When early one morning, a long boat with a pole on the bow with a red cloth was seen, and it was followed by several more. Each boat held 10 to 15 men. A smoke signal was sent, and soon every native person around the lake was aware the soldiers were arriving and just how many there were. The 2 men watching the trail from Ash Hill saw the infantries coming over the hill. They saw the men marching, firing shots with their threatening guns. They went to Stone and Kelsey's house, and then down towards the lake, across the valley near the lake port, and then to Scotts Valley. From there, they headed to the upper lake to set up camp on Emerson Hill. It was there they saw the Pomo camp on the island, Bonopoti. They told the cavalry that up to 600 Pomo armed warriors were stationed on this island. It was a made-up coalition, imagined to infuriate the mob of white men. In fact, the Pomo at Bonopoti never worked on Stone and Kelsey's ranch, and they had nothing to do with their murders. The island was mostly populated with women and children, and it was there Nika and her mother were finishing up their basket. This story is just beginning. And like Lily Tomlin, another hero of mine, said, things are going to get a lot worse before they get worse. Frontier pioneer Eliza Inman wrote in her journal in 1843, if hell laid to the west, Americans would cross heaven to reach it. It looked like she was right. Thank you for taking the time to listen today. I'm Andrea Anderson. Let's meet again next time when we continue the story of Nika, the Queen of Preservation, Chapter 10, Part 2, on Queens of the Mines. Side note, we hold pride in the United States based on ideas of freedom. People had wanted to practice freedom of religion, and they immigrated here to do so. When they arrived, they took the natives' religion and freedoms away. It seems to me the United States was more free pre-United States. There is an African proverb. I am reminded of it often while reviewing the history of the United States and the indigenous people. It says, "Until the story of the hunt is told by the lion, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter." Until recently, historians and the public have dismissed conflict history, and important elements that are absolutely necessary for understanding American history were downplayed or virtually forgotten. As we incorporate racial and ethnic conflict in the presentation of our American experience, hopefully we will finally understand how far we have come and how far we have to go. No matter how painful, we're only going to move forward when we all accept the truth. Queens of the Mines was written, produced, and narrated by me, Andrea Anderson. The theme song in San Francisco Bay is by DBUK. You can find the links to their music and merchandise, as well as links to all of our social media, research, and brand new merchandise at queensofthemines.com. We got hoodies just in time for fall and many more goodies. Please go check it out.